The sky was gray that morning, the kind of heavy gray that made everything feel quiet and serious. A light wind moved across the cemetery, brushing over the rows of white stones and carrying the soft smell of freshly cut grass. People dressed in black walked slowly toward the tent where the funeral was being held. Their voices were soft, almost whispers, as if even speaking too loudly would disturb the silence of the place. A young man stood near the entrance of the cemetery road, holding his breath for a moment before he walked forward. His hands were tucked into the pockets of his coat, and his shoulders were slightly lowered. It's like someone preparing for something unpleasant. He didn't look like the others who walked with confidence and hugged each other. He looked like someone who wasn't sure if he belonged. He paused near a sign and read the name printed on it. It was his father's name. He stared at it for a long moment, then let out a slow breath. This was the day he had been avoiding in his mind. He knew he had to come. But he also knew that stepping into this funeral meant stepping into a place where many people didn't want him. He took a few more steps, moving quietly, not wanting to draw attention to himself. But even before he reached the tent, a few relatives saw him. Their eyes narrowed. One of them whispered something to another. The second one frowned. He could feel their looks like weight pressing down on him. He kept his gaze on the ground, pretending not to notice. He didn't want trouble. He came only to say goodbye to his father, nothing more. As he reached the edge of the seating area, he stopped. He didn't try to sit. He didn't try to join the main group. He simply stood at the back, close to a tree, far enough that he couldn't disturb anyone. He folded his hands in front of him and stared at the flag-covered casket under the tent. Seeing it made his heart twist a little. Why? It didn't matter how complicated things had been between him and his father. Losing a parent was something that hurt deeply, no matter what. For a moment, he remembered a time when he was small, sitting on his father's shoulders, laughing as they walked through a park. Then his mind shifted to the years that followed, years full of distance, misunderstandings, and silence. He wished things had been different. But life didn't always give people the endings they hoped for. He was pulled from his thoughts when he heard someone speaking sharply near him. "What are you doing here?" He looked up slowly. One of his father's relatives, a man older than him, stood with his arms crossed. His expression wasn't friendly. "I came to pay my respects," the young man said quietly. "You shouldn't be here," the older man replied. "You weren't around. You didn't stay in touch. You don't get to show up now." The young man swallowed hard. "I'm not here to cause problems." "Then stand far back," the older man said, pointing away from the others. "This is for family." The words hit him harder than he expected. For family, as if he wasn't one, as if his existence didn't matter. He didn't argue. He stepped back even more, moving away until he stood near a cluster of trees at the very edge of the gathering. People turned to look at him, some with judgment, some with curiosity, and some with clear irritation. No one stepped forward to greet him. No one nodded, no one smiled. He felt like a shadow drifting at the edge of a world where he once belonged. The ceremony began soon after. A chaplain stepped forward and started speaking about honor, service, sacrifice, and duty. The words were beautiful, but they didn't tell the whole truth, not the truth the young man knew. Many people giving speeches didn't really know his father well. Some had barely spoken to him in years. But they stood there, acting as if they were the closest ones to him, as if they shared deep memories. The young man stayed silent, listening respectfully, even though some of the words stung. Not because they were wrong, but because they reminded him of all the chances he didn't take to mend things with his father. He wished he could go back and fix the past. He wished he had reached out earlier. Now it was too late. During one of the speeches, a woman sitting near the front whispered loudly enough for others to hear, "I don't know why he even showed up. He wasn't around. He shouldn't pretend now," another replied. "Exactly. He's just here to make it look good." Their words weren't directed at him directly, but he heard every syllable. He stayed still, refusing to show any reaction. He didn't want to give them a reason to accuse him of anything. He was only there to honor his father, not to fight anyone. When the honor guard began preparing to fold the flag, the tension in the air grew. This was the most sacred part of the ceremony, the moment when the folded flag would be presented to the next of kin. The young man knew he wouldn't be the one receiving it, didn't even expect to. He had made peace with that the moment he arrived, but he didn't expect what happened next as the soldiers stepped forward. One of the relatives turned around and looked directly at him with a cold expression. "Don't even think about coming forward," she said. "You don't deserve the flag." Another relative whispered loudly, "He shouldn't get anything. He didn't earn it." The young man looked down at his hands, trying to steady himself. He could feel a sting in his chest, a heavy mix of sadness, anger, and disappointment. He wanted to speak, to explain, to defend himself, but he didn't. He just stayed silent. Then, something unexpected happened. A row of cars arrived near the edge of the cemetery. Doors opened, and several uniformed officers stepped out, officers with medals, ribbons, and ranks that made the crowd straighten up. Among them was a 4-star general, a man whose presence made everyone stand at attention without needing to be told. People gasped quietly. Relatives who had been whispering now pretended to be polite. Smoothing their clothes and fixing their expressions, the general walked slowly toward the main tent. But he didn't look at the important relatives who tried to greet him first. Instead, his eyes scanned the entire gathering, observing everything, including the place where the young man stood alone beneath a tree. He leaned toward an aide and asked in a low voice, "Who is that standing back there?" The aide glanced at the young man, then whispered back, "That's the soldier's son, sir." The general stopped walking. His eyebrows lowered as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Why is he standing all the way back there?" he asked. The aide hesitated. "There were family issues, sir. They told him to stay away." The general looked toward the group of relatives, who were now standing proudly, waiting for him to honor them with his attention. But he didn't even look at them twice. Instead, he changed direction and walked straight toward the young man. People whispered, "Why is the general going over there? What's happening? Is he talking to him?" The young man saw the general approaching and froze. He wasn't expecting anyone to notice him, let alone someone of such high rank. The general stopped in front of him. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the general took a deep breath and said gently, "You must be his son." The young man nodded slowly, unsure what to say. The general straightened his posture and saluted him. The crowd behind them gasped. Some relatives went pale. The general said, "Your father told me stories about you. He was proud of you." "Very proud." The young man blinked, stunned. He never expected to hear those words, not today, not from anyone, and definitely not from a man who had served with his father at the highest levels. And just like that, everything changed. The relatives who had pushed him away were suddenly silent. They watched as the general stood beside the young man, treating him with a respect none of them had shown. Their expressions shifted from confidence to discomfort, to embarrassment, and finally to guilt. The general placed a hand on the young man's shoulder and said, "Come with me. You belong at the front." Without hesitation, the general guided him toward the center of the ceremony. The crowd parted. No one dared to block his way. No one dared to question the general. And for the first time that day, the young man felt seen. It's not as a stranger, not as someone who didn't belong, but as the son of the man being honored. He took his place beside the general, unaware of what was about to happen next. When the general placed his hand on the young man's shoulder and led him toward the front of the funeral, the atmosphere changed instantly. Moments earlier, people were whispering, judging, and treating him like someone who didn't belong. Now, those same people stepped aside, their faces stiff and uneasy. No one dared to say a word against the general. His presence brought a level of authority that silenced everything else. The young man walked quietly beside him, still unsure whether he should even be there. He felt many pairs of eyes following him, but for the first time. Those eyes weren't filled with anger or judgment, they were filled with shock. Even the relatives who had dismissed him earlier kept their distance, suddenly unsure of themselves. When they reached the front, the general motioned for him to stand next to the casket. The young man hesitated. "I don't want to cause tension," he whispered. The general shook his head firmly. "You're not causing anything. You're standing where you should have been from the start." The young man lowered his head, overwhelmed by emotions he had pushed down all morning. He never expected kindness. He never expected recognition. And he definitely never expected a 4-star general to stand up for him. The honor guard stood ready, the flag stretched tightly above the casket. Their uniforms were perfectly pressed, their expressions solemn. Every movement was controlled, gentle, and precise. The soft rustle of the flag was the only sound breaking the heavy silence around them. The general stepped slightly to the side, but stayed close enough that his presence felt like a shield. It was as if he was silently telling everyone, if anyone tries to disrespect him again, they will answer to me. The chaplain finished the final prayer, and the folding of the flag began. The young man watched every movement, his heart pounding. This was the moment that always carried the most meaning in a military funeral. He had seen videos of it before, but being here, watching it in person, knowing the flag belonged to his father, it felt completely different. It felt heavy. It felt real. As the soldiers folded each corner carefully, the wind suddenly calmed, almost as if nature itself was trying not to disturb the moment. Near the back, a few relatives shifted uncomfortably. One of them whispered, "Why is he standing there?" Another answered, "The general brought him." "What can we do now?" Their voices were low, but the young man noticed. He didn't look at them. He didn't need to. The general had given him a place, and that was enough. When the flag was folded into the perfect triangular shape, the lead soldier stepped forward and handed it to the general instead of the chaplain. That alone caused another wave of surprise in the crowd. It wasn't typical for a general to personally handle the flag unless there was something deeply important about the situation. The general accepted the folded flag with both hands. He held it with respect, then turned toward the young man. The crowd fell completely silent. The general stepped closer, bending down on one knee, not completely, but enough to show something meaningful. Generals didn't kneel unless the moment carried weight. Unless the person in front of them mattered, he lifted the flag and placed it gently into the young man's hands. "This," the general said softly but clearly, "belongs to you." The young man stared at the flag, then at the general. His hands trembled slightly, not because he was afraid, but because the moment meant more to him than he had expected. A few relatives gasped quietly. A few others looked down at the ground. Realizing how wrong they had been, the general continued, "Your father was proud of you. He talked about you more than you know." The young man's breath caught in his throat. He had always wondered how his father felt about him. Their relationship had been complicated, distant at times, confusing, and filled with misunderstandings. Hearing those words now at this moment felt like something inside him was finally healing. "He told me," the general said, "that no matter where life took you, he believed you would become someone who carried your own strength. He always kept hope for a better future between you two." The young man blinked quickly, fighting the tears building in his eyes. He whispered, "I didn't think he cared." The general shook his head. "He did. More than anything." The young man lowered his head. A tear slipped down his cheek, and he didn't wipe it away. He didn't feel embarrassed. The general hadn't said those words to flatter him or protect him. They were said with sincerity, with the weight of truth. The general then reached into his uniform jacket and pulled out a small objecta, a round metallic coin with detailed engravings. It caught the light as he held it out. "This," he said, "is a challenge coin from his final unit. He kept one for you. He said he would give it to you when the time was right. Since he cannot do that himself, I will honor his request." He placed the coin in the young man's free hand. The young man stared at the coin, feeling its weight. It was small, but in that moment, it felt like a bridge between him and the father he had lost. Behind them, some of the relatives stood frozen. They had spent the morning pushing him away, treating him like an outsider, insisting that he didn't belong. But now, the general had made it clear. No one had a right to deny him his place. The young man finally spoke, though his voice was soft. "Thank you. For doing this," the general nodded kindly. "Your father earned every honor he received, and you've earned the right to stand here as his son." Those words weren't grand or theatrical, but they cut through the air like a powerful truth. No one could argue. No one dared to. As the ceremony concluded, people slowly began to leave. But something was different now. The relatives who had spoken so boldly earlier now avoided meeting his eyes. Some looked guilty. Others simply didn't know how to approach him. One older woman, who had spoken harshly before, took a step toward him, opened her mouth to speak, then hesitated. She lowered her gaze and walked away instead. Perhaps she wanted to apologize but didn't know how. Or perhaps she was too ashamed. The young man didn't chase anyone. He didn't demand apologies. He didn't want to argue. He had received something stronger and more meaningful than their acceptance, the truth about his father, the honor he deserved. The general remained standing with him long after everyone else had gone. They walked a few steps together, stopping near a small bench. "I served with your father for many years," the general said. "He wasn't perfect. None of us are. But when it came to his family, he cared deeply, even when he didn't know how to show it." The young man nodded. "I wish I had reached out sooner." The general placed a hand on his shoulder. "Life doesn't always give us perfect timing. What matters is that you're here now." And he would be grateful for that. They stood together for a moment, looking at the casket one last time. The general then said, "If you ever want to hear stories about him, find me. I have plenty to tell, stories he would want you to know." A small, genuine smile formed on the young man's face. "I'd like that." As the general walked away, the young man remained still for a moment. The wind picked up gently again, brushing against the folded flag he held close to his chest. The loneliness he felt that morning was no longer there. Instead, there was a quiet strength building inside him. He felt connected to his father in a way he hadn't felt in years. He felt seen. He felt respected. And most importantly, he felt like he finally understood something he had been searching for. He wasn't alone. He looked at the flag one more time, and turned and walked toward the exit. His steps were steady. His heart felt lighter. Each step seemed to carry a new sense of purpose, as if the world had shifted just slightly in his favor. He came to the funeral expecting to stand in the shadows. Instead, he walked away, carrying the flag, the coin, and the truth his father had left for him. And that truth was enough to change everything.